Oh, hello. Welcome to the American Sci-Fi Classics Track Quarantine Panel. You caught me on a StreamYard call with two of my favorite people. Welcome. It is Thursday night. There are no other options on the internet or in your life
That's
for
right.
enjoyment. So you made the right choice. Every Thursday, every other Thursday, we do this kind of thing. And here's what we're doing tonight. As we've mentioned many times in our live action panels at Dragon Con, there's too many things for us to cover. Tonight, think of it like our roller panels where we do 20 random panels. Think of tonight as 1/10 of a roller panel, and we know the two things we're going to talk about. So first off, our two panelists are going to talk about Remington Steel, which is having its 40th anniversary this year.
God, that makes me feel
Unless my
I
math
am old.
is wrong. So,
And I still crush on Pierce Brosnan.
well, yeah, luckily he has still been in things. For the crushers of Pierce Brosnan, you still get to see him in tons of things all the time. So, speaking of crushing on people, Bobby Nash, tell us.
I don't understand that segue at all.
that's
Me
a
neither.
hell of a segue, yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Thank
the
you.
king of segues. Tell
I'll
people who
take
you
it.
are, what do you do?
Yeah. Well, I'm Bobby Nash. I'm an author and frequent Dragon Con guest. I am so looking forward to doing one of these in person this year. One of these panels in person. I write novels, comics, etc., etc. As you can tell by some of the stuff I write, I am a huge fan of the 70s, 80s, and 90s detective shows. I love them. They're and like in some of my series that are here, I try to capture that feel, that
Yeah.
tone of those type of stories. They were just a lot of fun. And Remington Steel was definitely one of the more comedic of the detective shows.
That was my favorite part of
Mhm.
the Remington Steel stuff. But now our second guest, also did the Remington Steel fans have a name? They should have.
I don't know. It can't be Steelers because that's
Yeah.
already taken.
Yeah, that's football.
It was pre-internet, so
It was
Yeah.
pre-internet. So
My fan name was Preteen.
nice.
was my
So
name.
Lola, introduce yourself, please.
I'm Lola Lariscy. I'm a writer and TV watcher, and I am of the age that I was a preteen and teen when this came out, and I crushed hard on, Pierce Brosnan because he was handsome, dark hair, everything we're told we want, tall, handsome, dark, whatever, all that stuff.
We're told that.
We're told that's what we want, and I fell hard. I was like, yeah, I like him. And that was just the beginning of a great career for him. So, I knew him when.
he also he was the epitome of cool,
Wasn't he?
at the time.
So
He was always in the in the suit, very much what he went on to become more famous for as James Bond much later. That tuxedos and always straightening up and just he was cool.
He was, and able to fit in any situation.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't the show? I believe it came on. Did it come on Saturday night? Maybe.
Oh, that I couldn't tell you.
I don't recall, but I remember watching it pretty religiously.
My memory's not quite that good.
Mine either. I can't even tell you what channel.
I remember it was NBC. I do remember
it was NBC. Okay, that sounds about right.
For some reason, back then, there was like network loyalty, and we were an NBC family.
Well, I also remember the hubbubaloo near the end of the run where Pierce had been tapped to play James Bond, and then NBC said, "Wait a minute, we have a show with him on it. We'll just keep him."
Yeah, because they were going to cancel it.
We happened to employ this guy, so
and they
kept him on for the extra year.
Yes, they gave him like an extra year and then canceled it just as it was too late for him to play Bond.
That's so mean.
Yeah. So we would have gotten one more movie with Pierce Brosnan.
Maybe two, because he would have took over for Timothy Dalton. Timothy Dalton did two. So
I mean, it's really a happy ending, because he did get to play Bond. Had he been passed over completely, that would have been a shame. I remember, though, every week we would get the TV guide, and I was on top of this when this thing happened. I was on top of Remington Steel. But to go back to the very beginning, I remember watching the very first episode, and it ends with a completely shocking twist where the real Remington Steel shows up. You think the show is going to be one thing, and it's totally not. You assumed it's going to be Stephanie Zimbalist pretending to be Remington Steele the whole time. And then handsome British boy shows up, and it's a whole different deal. And hijinks ensue from that point. What did you guys see the first episode when it aired or thereabouts?
I watched them all, but I just rewatched the first episode earlier today.
That is actually a good point. We got to tell people if you can stream it now. I'm obviously, since you found it,
I think you can pay for it. It's not streaming anywhere for free. You have to pay for it on Amazon.
Nowhere official for free.
Yeah,
you've got to do some Googling.
Yeah.
Okay.
I assume there are episodes on YouTube. But
We will.
Another site starts with a D, has an M in it.
We won't tell anybody.
Okay.
Everybody, look, it's not like we're broadcasting it over the entire internet right now. It's fine.
I do own the DVD, so I watched them that way. So I did own the DVD. So.
And you can, our friend Kevin, who will be seeing in a few minutes for our next half of the 2-in-1, he says you can buy them on the Amazon and the YouTube, on the iTunes. If you feel like doing things legally, which Remington Steel did not.
That's right.
So it's right in line.
Yeah.
Remington Steel wouldn't pay.
Yeah, I think that was the beauty of the show too, because it really wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just a detective show. It was also a con show because he was a con man.
Yeah.
And it was also a romantic comedy because the romantic comedy took a large chunk of it with the two main characters in that will they, won't they, flirty, lovey-dovey kind of, plots that were going back and forth. But the silliness didn't stop there because their cases were usually quite outlandish.
Tell us what you remember of it, because I'm blanking hard on. I remember Doris Roberts riding a speedboat in one episode. I don't know why that sticks with me, but
well, they would get these weird cases. Like there's one that revolves around someone has invented a cookie with no calories, and there's all this industrial espionage trying to get the one prototype. And they're trying to find it, and it's a wacky, like it's almost a mad world type of chase scene at the end of that episode.
Cool.
So there's stuff like that. There was a lot of stuff about his past. There was the stuff like this guy that invents video games gets killed, or just weird stuff like that. There's one where the guy is poisoned. He runs it's not cosmetic. It's air freshener, the breath spray. They're the inventor of the breath. They have this breath spray, and so all of the executives have a golden, breath spray tube, and someone poisons them in that. So stuff like that. It was a lot of that kind of stuff. It wasn't like, there's this, cheating husbands or salt. It was usually they were very serious. Yeah, I mean, even though they were killing people and they were solving a lot of murders, there was always something unique and quite comical.
And that's like a cozy mystery, That's a whole cozy mystery.
Really is that? Yeah. And I didn't know that was the name for it back then, but that's exactly what this is.
Yeah, makes you just want to curl up by a fire and go murder.
Yeah, because it wasn't like it wasn't like the high drama shows where the main characters weren't getting shot and beaten and stuff happened to them.
No Law and Order or anything.
Yeah, it wasn't overly violent. It was more almost slapsticky in a way.
It was. Yeah. And I remember just being gosh, I'm trying to I liked that Laura Holt was an equal partner.
Right.
Well, she's
Actually-
wasn't she originally supposed to be the owner?
Right. Well, she is
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, she
Yeah.
was. Yeah.
because it's especially in that first season, she is the one that knows how to do the job.
Because
Yeah.
Remington
He
Steele
is-
had to pretend he knew.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He's kind
Yeah.
of getting in the way. But
Mhm.
as the show progressed, he picked up and learned from her
Yeah.
to where as they go along, they become equal partners. She still owns the business. It's still her business.
Yeah.
But
She was
only
getting
they were the only two that knew that. Yeah.
She was
I
getting
know.
no headway. Now it's
Poor
kind of coming
lady.
back to me now. She was
Yeah.
getting no headway in the detective business until she invented
Mm-hmm. Right.
and
'Cause
Remington
name on the
Steel.
door.
Right, because the
Mhm.
opening to the first season had this narration where she explains the
Mhm.
thing of the show. That's where the how's this for a deep dark secret opening, which I thought was a perfect line.
Yes.
I want to know what's going on.
Uh-huh.
And she goes, the great detective Remington Steele does not exist.
Do-do-do.
Yeah, I created him because at that time, the conceit of the show was no one took a woman private detective seriously,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and that she was getting nowhere, putting her own name on the door. So when she invented this superior, suddenly she's getting work around the clock,
Mhm.
and she's still doing all the work because Mr. Steele was always out of town or in a meeting or whatever. And it's not until he shows up and kind of assumes Remington Steele's identity, and then of course that gets in the paper. And so now it's like, oh crap! Now there's
he
a
is
face.
Remington Steel. Yeah.
Right, now there's a face to it, and so she hits upon the idea that, well, great, we have a face.
Yeah.
He can be the public whatever, and I'll still get the work done. And
Yeah.
then hijinks ensue, as Joe said.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But the two characters had great chemistry.
I know.
I thought they played off each other very well. They were both very funny
Mhm.
in that, because
Yeah.
like I said, there's a lot of that almost slapsticky humor of and physical comedy. There's a lot
Like
of
the
that in there.
old movies from the 40s and 50s, like that.
Lola, talk about that, because it was a throwback really in that relationship, because in the early 80s, maybe it was more prominent. Maybe people remembered the old throwback detective stuff like Nick and Nora Charles back then, but this was very much that. In where there was Macmillan and Wife, that comes to mind, but they were already married. We already knew the end to that story. they didn't have anywhere else to go. They were already together. But I don't recall there being anything. Now, of course, Moonlighting, which again, our friend Kevin Cafferty has a podcast about the show. We'll be talking about that eventually, I'm sure. But
Moonlighting kind of gets its start here.
Well, is it the same creator?
Glenn Gordon Cairn was one of the writers on the show.
Okay.
And he left Remington Steele to create Moonlighting, which has a lot of the same. It's a detective and an amateur. It's just
nice.
the roles are switched.
Yeah,
because David Addison was the detective, and Maddie was
She was just like a socialite or something, right?
Yeah, right. And so it was kind of like the same kind of romantic, slapsticky comedy. So they're very similar in at least at the basics. They each found their own rhythm. But yeah.
I remember there was a big, back in the olden times, the new seasons you would always be obsessed when the new seasons would start. You're like,
September.
hot dang, yeah, because of the giant preview issue of TV Guide, for one thing. And then they would always change everything about most shows.
Yeah.
And this show, the big change was they added Doris Roberts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah, because the first season there were 4 of them.
Yeah.
And then with the second season, Doris replaced the other 2.
Right. Okay. I did not remember that at all.
And there was also from a story standpoint, it added the secret identity back, because in season 1, everybody working at the agency knew he was not a real detective. When Doris Roberts' character Mildred gets hired, she does not know that he's not real.
Oh,
she doesn't find out for like 2 or 3 seasons. I think it's 2. I think it's 2 seasons before she figures it out. And so there's a lot of that secret identity thing going on where they've got to keep this bit hidden from her, and she's sucking up to the boss when and ignoring the person that actually owns the place.
I know.
Yeah.
Did they have continuing storylines? Because I don't remember that they did.
They had arcs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Like what, Lola?
Part 1 and part 2.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
But there were also a lot of stories about his past that it'd be like an episode here, an episode there, but if you strung them all together, there's a lot of stuff about his past because we even at the end of the show, we do not know his real name. We do not know, we don't know really, but bits and pieces about him. And a lot of that comes from his run-ins with a guy named what's his name?
Daniel Chalmers.
Daniel Chalmers.
Who was actually Stephanie Zimbalist's father. That's Efren Zimbalist.
Efren Zimbalist Jr.
Yes. He was her real life father. But in the show, we later, spoiler alert, find out he's Remington Steel.
And that's like the last 2 episodes where we find that out, and where he finds it out because he didn't know either.
Yeah, because they were con artists together.
Yeah.
Back in the day. And so there's a lot of stuff like that where things from his past would get in the way, or Daniel would get him.
What I liked about Remington Steel, what I still like about it is that this was not the kind of thing you found all over the place in the early 80s. This was a very unique show for its time and for, now granted, very 80s, not a complaint, but I just remember it being unique to me at the time, not just because of the pairing of the two and their relationship, but just the secret of usually every show, especially every detective show, gave you all the information up front, while Remington Steele trickled it out over the course of the series, and as you said, Bobby, never really revealed it all.
Right, and it was one of the detective shows at the time too were not funny. They might have funny bits, but they were not planned as comedies. The writers of the show were writing a comedy, and because at the time you had things like Miami Vice, or where people are getting shot up, and it's very angsty and dramatic and
dark.
Yeah, and this was kind of like a little bright light over here in the corner.
And it was knowingly funny. Like I rewatched the last 2 episodes, which was filmed in Ireland. Well, I guess it was Ireland. It was certainly set in Ireland. And there's a running gag. It cracked me up because he finds out that he owns this castle, and he goes and it has all this staff. I mean, they've got all these crazy titles like head domestic architect and stuff. There's all this. And every time he meets a new staff person, they present him a bill. And the bills are like 98,000 pounds. Heating, electricity, and stuff like that. And you see this look on his face. And then he's running around turning off lights. And then at the end, he finds out that one of the staff is not who he thinks. It's not who she appears to be. And he said, "You made a fatal mistake." And she said, "What?" And he said, "You failed to present me a bill."
Ooh.
That's how he knew she was fake.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier, Joe, too, that you remember Doris Roberts driving a speedboat. That was they actually traveled several times out of the country to film episodes.
Okay.
And this was one where they were, I want to say they were in Mexico at one of the resort areas. I think I could be wrong. But this was the episode after they had come back from being canceled, and they knew Pierce could not be James Bond. So they did a 2-part James Bond episode where he's basically playing Bond in this. It's a very secret agent. Yeah, they were like aping the Bond theme, but they kept working things into the dialogue where the word cancel would get brought up. Every time it would get brought up, they would be like, "Oh, no, we hate that word."
I gotta say, if I'm Pierce Brosnan, the actor, and maybe someday, if I'm Pierce Brosnan and I lose out on the biggest gig of my life and career, and I'm forced to stay on my current job, which is about to go away, I think, I'd be super into everyone joking about it all day. Like, yes, please, let's talk about this some more.
Yeah.
My failure.
Yeah. On
My
the other
failure.
hand, though, on the other hand, he would not have probably have been considered for James Bond
Exactly.
without this show.
That's a good
Exactly.
point. It got him on the radar.
Yeah, because this really was his introduction to American audiences.
Yeah.
And so
It was a
And
big show.
I
I
love.
remember.
He in recent years he's started doing comedies, or
Mhm.
more frequently doing comedies, and he's great because I remember watching him on Remington Steel and saying, well, that's a funny dude, because he has not been able to do such things, or he's not done such things.
Yeah.
He was in Eurovision Song Contest with
Yes, he played his
Couple years ago.
father. I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, he's very Icelandic. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And he's
been
about
in
to
multiple things. Go ahead, Bobby.
he's about to be Dr. Fate in the Black Adam movie.
I didn't know
And
that.
like
Yes.
I can't even wrap my mind around that, Bobby.
Yeah.
I can't even I just got goosebumps just thinking about
Mhm. But
like
it's-
the Justice Society's gonna be in a movie.
yeah.
It's
But he's
that-
also
we're
he's-
not talking about that.
Yeah.
We
But he is one of those actors that has been able to not be typecast too much.
Yeah.
He does play villains. He does play heroes.
He was in a Stephen King movie.
Yeah, he did those Mamma
played a
Mia
writer.
musicals, you know.
Okay, yeah. He was in the Mamma Mia movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of, silliness there. I mean, he's in Mrs. Doubtfire. You know.
He is the one who was victimized by the run-by fruiting.
Yep.
Classic.
So yeah, really, really fantastic actor, and of course Doris Roberts, went on to quite a bit of
Everyone
acclaim,
loves
especially-
Raymond.
Yeah. And Stephanie Zimbalist still works, but not quite as much. But I do see her pop up in like guest star bits here and there.
Yeah, like when you see her, you're like, oh, hey.
Yeah.
But she's not. But I think this show is not. I don't know that it's number one on anybody's list of favorite shows ever. I'm sure it is somebody's favorite show, and that's great. What I mean is, when people write down the list of great detective shows, this isn't really at the top of the list, but I think it. I feel like people need to revisit this thing. It's bringing back fond remembrances from me, and with you guys sitting here talking about it, I mean, my gosh, this is good stuff.
Mm-hmm. And well written too. I find it well written. And I watched, like I said, I had the DVD, so I remember watching some of the extras where they interviewed the writer, and all of the writing staff went on to create and run their own shows. And so I mean, there's a lot of shows that do make that list that came from people who started here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we probably would not have mentioned this show at all, except that it happened to come up on our gigantic anniversary list. But I love that we got a chance to talk about it for a few minutes. But speaking of that, it's almost time for you guys to get the heck out of here for the second half of tonight's 2-in-1. Lola, tell people where on the interwebs you can be found.
Well, I had a website, but I tried to go to it the other day and got a oops message, so I need to look into that.
Yeah.
I know, who cares? Who needs it? I got Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, all that stuff. So you can find me. Just Google my name. I'm there.
Yeah. And Bobby.
BobbyNash.com is my main website. There's links to everything there. If you do Google just Bobby Nash, you will find a lot of other people. There's that guy that's on that 911 show. There's the MMA fighter, the basketball, So there's a lot of Bobby Nashes out there. But
you're in an episode of the Creepshow TV series.
I'm in 2 episodes of Creepshow. Yes.
Oh.
Yes. So yes, I play a Santa in one and a fat guy in the other.
Just one has a red and white hat.
Yeah. Well, I'm in the other one where I'm the before because it's one about weight loss, and so I'm the before, and another guy comes
Bobby.
out from the machine after me. Yeah, so it's really fun. He explodes, so I'm
okay. You're
We're
fine.
good then. I'd rather be you.
Yeah, but yeah. So, but you can find me there. I'm also I'm author Bobby Nash on Facebook, Bobby Nash Writes on Instagram, and at Bobby Nash on Twitter, and all over the place. Just
You're literally all over the place. I went to a convention last fall. I walk in the door. First thing I saw, Bobby Nash.
Neat. Okay.
So spend some time in live action with Bobby Nash if you can. Buy his books. Buy Lola's book. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. We will see you all very soon. Now, you guys better get to stepping.
I'm getting out. I don't remember how.
Boom, you're out.
see ya.
Gary Mitchell. How are
Hello.
you, sir?
I am well, or should I say, oi?
And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. What a smooth, seamless transition. I booted those other two people out of here. And anywho's, welcome. If you're just now tuning in to the American Sci-Fi Classics Track, you're
You're welcome.
I dare say a scintillating conversation about Remington Steel, a show that was on like 5 years in the 80s, starring a British guy. And now we're going to talk about a show that was also on for multiple years in the 80s, also starring British people. So the young ones, as I said at the beginning of panel number 1 in our 2-in-1 panel, never seen it.
That's it.
You're missing out, Joe.
Heard about it.
It's amazing.
Gary, I think you know what to do.
Yeah, I know exactly what to do.
Well, that didn't take long.
That didn't take long at all. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, he was a bloody wanker. So let's introduce ourselves before we get into the meat of this. Kevin, who are
Hey,
you?
I'm well. I'm Kevin Cafferty. I host the internet's second most popular Moonlighting podcast and the internet's first most popular podcast about movies that involve skateboarding.
All right. And it's called?
Gleaming the Tube.
Thank you. And down below me there, the lovely Beth Van Dusen. Where might people know you?
Well, you might know me from Needless Things, but you also might know me from the podcast I co-host, Execute Chapter 66, a Star Wars book club. And I would just like to say, we meet again, Mr. Cafferty.
Mm-hmm. This is the one I'm super excited about, though. Oh my god,
Yes.
I love this show.
Yes, we're here to talk about a show I think that only could have happened in England. It is a pure ball of rock and roll, anarchy, chaos. The Young Ones. So, Beth, for anyone who, like our person I had to boot out of here, who may have never seen it, what is The Young Ones?
Well,
Yeah, can you describe it?
it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen, but it's also the most brilliantly funny thing I've ever seen. It's comedy, variety, puppets, music guests, nonsense. It's at both times very highbrow and extremely, extremely lowbrow.
Yes.
It is a show that is very difficult to define and describe. It's just something you have to watch. There's only 12 episodes, Joe. Get on it.
How would you describe it, Kevin?
I mean, on its face, it's a show about 4 students who live in a house together, but it also encompasses everything Beth said. I would note that, I mean, Beth had mentioned the bands, and the bands are a big part of the show, but the only reason the show had musical guests was because they realized if they had a band on, the BBC would classify them as a variety show and they would get a larger budget than if they were a sitcom.
Indeed. And like Motorhead was on there. Who were some of the other guests?
Madness were in
Twice.
2 episodes. Yeah. A band called Rip Rig and Panic, who were not very popular, but Nina Cherry was in them. The Damned were in an episode. Dexy's Midnight Runners playing a song other than Come On Eileen. So there's one episode where instead of a band, they have a lion tamer to like satisfy the variety clause. Instead of a band, one of the characters walks into a room and there's a lion tamer.
Because the show was anarchy. So our cast, like you said, it was 4 guys. We had Neil, who was a hippie, basically. You're straight out of the 60s hippie. Vivian, who is my personal favorite, who is the stereotypical anarchist punk rock guy. Rick, aka Prick, by the wonderful Mile. Rick Mile playing Rick. And then Mike, who was the American. And thus the cool one, which, when I was a kid and saw this on PBS, I was like, oh, well, okay, so Americans are cool, I guess.
And Mike was interesting because he was the only one who was kind of an actor rather than a comedian performer.
Mm-hmm.
That character was originally written for a guy named Peter Richardson, who was Nigel Planer, who played Neil's comedy partner. But Peter Richardson and Paul Jackson, the producer, did not get along. And so he was booted from the show. And so they hired Mike as an actor, which I think kind of worked because Mike played more of a straight man for these other kind of like chaotic characters to bounce off. We should also mention Alexi Sale, who played a variety of different characters, usually as part of the Belowski family, who's another person who came out of that British sort of alternative comedy scene of the late 70s, early 80s, and who they brought along for the show, and they would just sort of like put a hole in the episode and he would show up and do something crazy.
Yes.
And he had one of my favorite musical performances because Dr. Martin's Boots is a instant classic.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And I guess that's part of why it's so hard to describe, because we have the one guy who was relatively the straight guy. We had 2 different anarchists, both flavors. And then, the hippie who's just pretty much there to get, make stoner jokes and get picked on a lot. And their adventures range from everything from going to a college high IQ competition to one of the best riffs on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe I think I've ever seen.
When Vivian goes into Narnia. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And it's just like, I remember watching that episode when it was on. I'm like, what? They're not. No. What?
And the show is usually like entirely divorced from any plot that makes sense. There's one that like starts where they find a girl in the house and then the girl turns out to be a serial killer and then the entire house goes back in time.
Yeah.
Which is never explained.
Yeah. The show had, I think they call it negative continuity. Because how many times did Neil get killed?
Or the house explode.
Or the house. Yeah, I think one of my favorites is one time they killed Neil by accident and they buried him in the backyard and he grew out like a tree and suddenly there were like 40 of him because he kept budding off of the tree. It was just, and you'd watch the show just going, what?
Oh my God. And then the garden gnome
yes.
comes to life and starts saying like, Rick's just killed a hippie. Rick's just killed a hippie.
Yeah.
And Rick kills him. Rick like starts kicking the garden gnome. Oh my God. Like, one thing I'll say about this show is like, I know humor is very subjective and different people find different things funny, but I have been watching this show since I've been like 12 years old. And I know every line and I know every joke and I still laugh my head off every time I watch it. I think, some of the performances, even just like Rick Miles saying something like, well, cock-a-doodle-doo, Neil, I will just lose my crap watching it.
I didn't need to refresh myself before this tonight, but I did anyway. I watched my 3 favorite episodes just before this, just because I wanted to watch it again, even though I still know most of the words. But there are still things that surprise you, and there are still things that I just catch a look on Vivian's face, or just the way Neil says, "Oh wow," still makes me laugh.
Neil he does such a great deadpan all the time. I'm very depressed. It's just he's adorable, and it's just like, oh. And then
he
somebody
so
comes in.
seriously puts on his little rain bonnet to go outside.
Yes.
Well, I love how passive aggressive Neil is to the rest of the housemates, and how like Rick will like beat up on Neil sometimes, but Mike and Vivian won't as much because they see that Neil has purpose because he does all of the cooking and cleaning in the house.
Right. So, how did each of you discover it? Like I said, for me, I think I first said at the PBS, but I think it was when MTV started showing it. I think is when I found it. How did you two find it?
I think I also found it from MTV, but I looked to see when MTV aired it, and I don't know that in 1986 I would have gotten jokes about Thatcher. But I don't know that would have stopped me from watching it because it was still silly, and I'd already been watching things like Doctor Who and Monty Python and things like that with my parents, so I was already interested in the British humor. So I think probably I came for the slapstick and stayed as I grew up for the jokes that I ended up getting eventually.
I think for me, it was definitely when it was on MTV, but I grew up in the woods and I didn't have cable, but my grandparents did. So I was constantly trying to come up with excuses to go to their house on Sunday nights because it aired late. And so you'd watch that and then 120 minutes would come on. And I think I was interested in British humor, but I was also, it's sort of when MTV started showing it, probably not like right away, but like a year or two in, coincided with when I started getting heavily into like punk rock. And at the time, there was not a lot of content on television, I think in Britain or in the US, that would like have references to punk rock or be in any way like acknowledgement of it. The Dickies appearance on Don Rickles' CPO Sharky notwithstanding. And so I think like merging those two things, like it had, like Beth said, it had really smart jokes and had really dumb jokes, and it had all these references to punk rock, and it had references to Margaret Thatcher that went over my head, but I thought were funny anyway. And I was just like, at the time, it was like my favorite show, and it's still one of like my top 4 or 5 favorite shows. And I know that there's probably a whole contingent of people who came to it when Comedy Central started airing it in the 90s, in the early 90s, because I think it left MTV for a while. And it wasn't airing anywhere here, and I had to like track down like 12th generation VHS copies, and then Comedy Central started showing it in the early 90s for a while too.
Yeah, and I remember when I found out, like, because it seemed like it was on forever when I watched it, and then to find out, wait a minute, it's only 12 episodes. It felt like more. That's kind of because how much stuff happens in every episode. Like, none of them slow down. They're all just go, go, go.
And I think that's Fawlty Towers' fault. I think Fawlty Towers did 2 like perfect seasons and got out. And I was listening to an interview with Lisa Myers, who was one of the writers. And she said that Rick Mile, who was also like one of the writer creators of the show, as well as performing on it, thought like, well, we need to get out after 2 series like Fawlty Towers did. And you see that among a lot of like the really top grade British comedy shows, like the UK Office did 2 seasons and a special and we're done. Spaced got out after 2 seasons. It seemed like Fawlty Towers seemed to set a template of like, if you really want to be considered in the A-list sometimes, like you do 2 and you're done, even if you still could have done a 3rd series that would have been probably just as good.
Well, Red Dwarf is still going as of what, last year?
Yep.
Yes.
It's back
One
again.
of the few.
Yeah, well, you don't overstay the joke if you come in, do your 2 minutes and get out, I think that's one of the things, because to kind of tie into the previous show we were just talking about, Remington Steele ran about 2 seasons too long. Cheers, maybe 1 season too long. A lot of comedies have a shelf life. So coming in, telling your jokes, and then, yeah, we could do more, but let's not ruin this, I think is a good idea.
Well, and Rick Mayall went on to do and Adrian Edmondson went on to do a lot more work together, and it was
Oh,
still
yeah.
hysterical. Bottom is still really funny.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the young ones, but it's good.
No. Mm-hmm. So, who would you pick as your favorite of the foursome, Beth?
I believe my name is a hint. I do love Rick, and a lot of that is just because of Rick Mayall. He was such a genius.
Mm-hmm.
I love Drop Dead Fred. I've loved everything I've seen him in. He was just brilliant. Even the faces, even when he wasn't speaking,
Mm-hmm.
he could make me laugh. And I like Vivian, I like Neil. Mike, never my favorite, but you got to have a straight man.
Yeah.
But I definitely say Rick would be my favorite.
Hey, how about you, Kevin?
I'm with Beth. Rick Mayall gives, I think, like one of the funniest performances of all time on that show. It's just like weird little bits, and Ade Edmondson and Nigel Planer and even Christopher like are all great too.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like the stuff Rick Mayall was doing on that show, it's like he was touched by the divine. Like, it's
yeah, it's like Beth was saying, you need Mike as the straight man, but watching the pure exasperation of Rick every episode, everything he's trying to do, he's just like, I'm gonna do that, and it just goes completely sideways. And just watching him as everything falls apart, he is just so manic.
I started laughing hysterically tonight when I was watching one of the episodes, and one of the Boloskis comes in. I believe it was Billy comes in and won't stop talking, and Rick just starts going. That's all he was doing, but I couldn't stop laughing at it.
Do you have either? Sorry, Kevin, you were going to say something?
no, I was just laughing. I was just laughing, thinking of what Beth was talking about.
Yeah. Do either of you have a favorite episode or bit? Like, I personally, I love when they go to the IQ Bowl, especially the way they lampoon the upper crust school, which has got a hell of a cast. It's got Hugh Laurie. It's got, now my brain is falling out,
Stephen Fry and
Emma
Emma
Thompson.
Thompson.
and Emma Thompson, yes. And just, they do, go then.
Oh, and Ben Elton, who
Yeah. Just the perfect send up of the British upper class twit.
Probably mine would be Nasty. That was the first episode I picked out tonight. That's the one where they get the video cassette player, and Vivian has to scream like 30 times, "Yes, we've got a video." But that one's got Terry Jones. It's got The Damned. Thank you, young ones, for introducing me to goth music. Alexi Sale plays a South African vampire pretending to be a driving instructor. And Neil's great line, and this was funnier when Leonard Cohen was alive, but when he says, "We'll all be dead and yet still alive, like Leonard Cohen." It's still funny, but it was funnier when he was alive.
Yeah.
I think my favorite episode is probably the one Gary mentioned with University Challenge, Bambi. But I will say, I think the funniest sequence in the show is from the first season, in the episode Interesting, where they have the party, where Rick rifles through one of the party guests' handbag and pulls out a tampon and thinks it's a present and says, "Oh, look, it's a telescope with a mouse inside." And it's just so ridiculous and so funny that like Rick Mayall plays it perfectly. I cannot believe how brilliant that show is. And I like, that's something I think where Lisa Meyer being on the writing staff like really helped, because obviously there's not a lot of like representation for women on that show, but it was nice to at least have that voice in the writer's room.
Yeah. And I keep coming back to this, but that pure chaos element of you never knew what was going to happen. Like the bit with that joke is like, that is not something you would expect. And it would, for a lot of shows, that would feel like something that's off limits. And this show was proudly going, nothing's off limits. We're going anywhere.
When they wiped the screen away that one time and they said, "Get the screen back before Elephant Head comes out and starts singing." And the guy with the big elephant head comes out and sings "Stop in the Name of Love." Like, stuff like that, I just think is so amazing.
It just that's I think what keeps it fresh and still keeps it interesting because you try to watch a lot of 40-year-old sitcoms. Like I mean, YouTube. I even try to watch some sitcoms from like the '90s, and it's like, oh, this is just, yeah, we thought this was funny, and then you go back and you watch this, and I'm still laughing my ass off.
Yeah, well, I think like college students then and now are obnoxious, which I think helps give it a bit of timelessness. The Margaret Thatcher jokes notwithstanding. I mean, like, God, she was like how Ronald Reagan was 80s hardcore punk's greatest muse. I feel like Margaret Thatcher had a similar effect on Great Britain. Like, you go to a Billy Bragg concert now and he's going to start talking about her.
Well, and I think any generation of young people knows those stereotypes, no matter when you're growing up. You've known people in high school and college that were hippies, and you've known the punks, and you've known the ridiculous socialists who don't know what it means, who start screaming for the pigs as soon as something goes wrong, but everything else is fascist.
Yes. And I think that's why Rick's so funny. Like, Rick is like Daffy Duck. Like, he's always trying to be the cool guy, but he fails so spectacularly. Whereas, Vivian's fairly successful at being a force of destruction, which is what he wants to be.
Yeah. It's like, I just remember seeing an ad, speaking of Vivian, I remember seeing a fake ad they did for it was like, do you have an unsightly blemish, but you think people will miss it? Use this mascara to draw a circle around it and draw an arrow to it so no one can, hey, look at my spot.
Now, have either of you ever seen, because I have not, and I'm dying to see it. Apparently there was an unsuccessful attempt to make an American version of the show called Oh No, Not Them. And I think Nigel Planer is in it as Neil, but he's the only cast member who from the original show is in it. And I've never seen it, and I'm dying to see how bad it is.
I'm sure it's as bad as the American Red Dwarf.
Yes.
Attempt. I'm sure it's that bad, but I have not seen it. I was reading about it earlier, and I read that Nigel wanted out so badly he was thankful when it got canceled or didn't get picked up. I still want to see it just to watch it be bad.
Yeah, I had completely forgotten about it until you mentioned it, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember hearing about that and hearing that it was atrocious. So what do you think is the legacy of the young ones? Because everybody knows Monty Python. There's a lot of British comedy shows. Are You Being Served, which was on forever. Everybody knows that one if you're a Brit file. Young Ones seems to be still underground. What do you think is the legacy?
I don't think it's underground in the UK.
I feel like there's a lot of things that even if they don't know it or necessarily speak about it, there's a lot of humor that owes its roots to the success of that show. Even though it wasn't successful here, it was very successful in the UK. And I don't think we'd have gotten quite the slapstick of something like Absolutely Fabulous if that show hadn't done well.
True. And as one of our wonderful watchers pointed out, French and Saunders did make an appearance on there.
They did. I believe, isn't Adrian Edmondson still married to Jennifer Saunders?
I believe so, yes. I think the legacy is, before the Young Ones, the big movements in British comedy were kind of Oxford, Cambridge, which is kind of, Monty Python's probably the most famous example of that. But I also think the crew from the University Challenge, like Hugh Laurie, Stephen Fry, was like the dominant voice in British comedy. And I think the Young Ones shifted things for a while to like some of what was coming out of the scene in Manchester and some of what was coming out of the alternative. I think it had maybe a similar effect that, something that like Kids in the Hall did in Canada and the US.
Okay. Which is coming back. So would you want to see not an American version, but would you want to see a British resurrection like the Young Ones 2020? Or do you think it could even work?
Not without Rick.
No. If Rick Marl was still with us, I think there could be like a funny maybe like a one-off thing for comic relief, or like a holiday special of like the old ones of like them in a nursing home still beating the crap out of each other.
Oh God, that would be hilarious. Yes.
I wouldn't want to see a reboot with like it'd be like the New Monkeys. I don't want to see the New Monkeys.
Yeah, that was bad.
Oh man, I forgot about that show. Thanks, Kevin.
I think sometimes, you know, things have their moment, and especially something like The Young Ones, which only has 12 episodes and is sort of preserved in amber as this perfect thing. So no, I want to see the next thing that has the impact that The Young Ones had.
Okay. And so you would both recommend people to go watch it, and would you give them any kind of warning?
Well, if I were, say, your Classic Track co-director, I would recommend not diving in with the first episode. I would recommend going in with one of the favorites we referenced here, because I think the first episode is a pilot that was shot a little bit before they got into it, so it feels a little bit off. But I don't know about the warning. I mean, you know, nothing out there is that extreme.
Well, I mean, how would you prepare for someone for watching this if they're used to like a standard Britcom? Or would you just say it's funny, watch it?
Yeah, I mean, I would maybe warn like some of the jokes, which I don't think were like had a negative intent. You know, some of the use of language now is not what it was in the early 80s, and I think that hasn't aged well. So I would warn people of that. There's a few things that haven't aged well. I would say to kind of go into watching it with a mind, like not expecting it to make sense, to kind of go with it. But I also think like not everything is for everybody. So some people might not spark to it.
Just prepare for the absurd. Don't look too hard at the plot, because yes, they're students, but you never see them go to school or even open a textbook. They are ostensibly students, but that's not what the show's about.
No. It is about beating up Neil.
So about lentils.
It's about lentils, yes. So many lentils. So, Kevin, any final thoughts or something you wanted to say about The Young Ones?
I feel like we should mention Vivian's Pet Hamster Special Patrol Group before we finish up here, because I would feel remiss if we did not, because Special Patrol Group, the insane Scottish hamster, is one of my favorite characters on the show too.
I almost put that as my quotations name.
How about you, Beth? Is there any particular bit that you wanted us to make sure we discussed about The Young Ones?
I feel
like very, very bored.
I feel like we've covered the parts that I really felt like were important that we covered. The only people that we haven't talked about, I'd forgotten that Robbie Coltrane was in at least one episode. I think he was in 2 or 3, but I just saw him pop up again in one I was watching tonight as a bouncer in Rick's bedroom.
He's the bouncer for when Mike turns Rick's bedroom into a roller disco.
Yes.
He's also in the episode where he's playing someone who brings an elephant in.
Yes.
Where the giant eclair falls on University Challenge.
Just enjoy the ridiculousn's. That's it. It's a star-studded, fantastic mess, but it's beautiful.
Yeah, that would be my like what I would tell someone is just sit down, don't think about it, just go for the ride. Like, but didn't they just don't? No, just don't. I mean, one episode ends with them going off the road in a bus and dying in a fireball. I mean, so just don't worry about it. Just go.
The continuity of this is all screwed up.
Yes.
There were 3 Neils at the end of last episode.
All right.
He
so
was the
Kevin,
seed.
Yes, the seed.
Nature grows the seed.
And again, it's like I said, it came out of nowhere. The Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe Narnia visit episode is just like I remember just watching it at the time and just being like, I'm loving this, but what?
When Billy Barty takes his pipe out of his mouth and his whole beard comes off.
Yes.
Someone in the comments mentioned Cliff Richard, and I did not know who Cliff Richard was when I started watching The Young Ones, but I know who Cliff Richard is now. And I do have that 45 RPM single that The Young Ones put out with Cliff Richard.
Oh, nice.
Which was a #1 hit in the UK, I believe.
All right, so Kevin, if people were interested in hearing what you have to say about moonlighting or skateboarding or more about Neil, where would they find you?
All right, well, gleamingthetube.net is where the podcast about skateboard movies lives, and the most recent episode is about Blue Crush, and my friend Guy Benoit tries to argue that it should be spoken of in the same breath as Citizen Kane and Vertigo. And moonlightingpodcast.com is where you can find my podcast about moonlighting called Let's Get Chatty about David and Maddie.
And Beth, where might people find you?
You can find Execute Chapter 66 wherever you find fine podcasts.
What's your next book?
We are doing, let's see, we just recorded the last of the Padme trilogy last night. And then next week we're doing posting the second of the original Thrawn trilogy.
Nice. All right. I suppose I have to let him back in. Have you learned your lesson?
Yes. Thank you.
Joe, you had at least time to watch a highlights reel on YouTube. Come on.
I did that, and it is hilarious. So now I am going to include the song that you talked about. I'll put that in the show notes with Mr. Cliff Richard, the entertainer of the millennium. But yeah, I had heard of it, but
well, that's a start.
I don't know.
There were long stretches where it was not super readily available in the US.
Now, where is it? We mentioned earlier Remington Steel you can buy on Amazon, and you can go somewhere on the dark web and get copies of it. But where are Young Ones? Where is Young Ones available to view now?
Every episode's on YouTube.
Perfect.
For freezies.
See, look at that.
There you go.
No excuses, Joe. But in fairness to you, it is called American Sci-Fi Classics, so I'll let you slide.
I mean, I do watch British things.
Yes. Yeah, we are kind of taking our lives in our hands talking about this, that the Brit track doesn't come after us, but we figured it was worth the risk.
If they want to do quarantine panels about American stuff, feel free. We just we get Gary, and I think you will agree, we get covered in this pile of shows and movies that we could do.
I'm glad you said shows.
Yes. And then we're like, let's pick two things out, and then much like Tetris or Jenga, it all falls to pieces. But we got two of these knocked out. I'm very excited, and only like 978 more, and then we'll have everything covered for 2022.
And we look forward to having you both on again. And in 2 weeks we will return. Next episode, we are going to be talking about appreciating the fine oeuvre of one Stephen J. Cannell, who pretty much defined 80s television. At least action television.
Yeah, I thought for a minute until I used the internet that Stephen J. Cannell did Remington Steel. I just assumed because he did everything else. But in 2 weeks, we'll talk about that. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. Thank you to Gary and Lola, there's Gary. Wait, I'm pointing right at him. Nope. There's Gary. There's Gary right there. Phone home. Phone home, Gary. There was Gary. Thank you to Bobby Nash, the award-winning Bobby Nash. and the award-seeking Lola Strickland for coming and hanging out with us and talking about Remington Steel. And Kevin and Beth, hopefully we will see all of you guys in live action at DragonCon this year. Thank you to everybody who came out and hung out with us for a little while. We will see you in 2 weeks.
Phew, that was close.
So in 2 weeks, Gary Mitchell, you can tune in to hear Gary Mitchell say,
I can't believe I got that stuck in the typewriter.
oh, good night, everybody. Let's all freeze like on Police Squad.